In the busy galaxy of the 23rd century, humans were often seen as weak and unimportant. They had just started traveling to distant stars and were nowhere near as advanced as the other alien species in the galaxy. Ethan Drake, a human mechanic aboard the starship Unity's Pride, knew this well. He had been working on the ship for years, fixing engines, repairing equipment, and keeping the ship running smoothly. But there was one problem: the aliens. The crew of Unity's Pride consisted of various species from across the galaxy. There were the massive Kroga warriors, tall and powerful, their strength unmatched by any human. Then there were the sleek, intelligent Zellerans, a race of scientists and philosophers who could calculate faster than any computer. And the Xandari, an agile and swift race of traders, whose fleet never seemed to get lost. All of these species, along with many others, looked at humans as primitive. Ethan, however, was used to this. He had grown up hearing that humans were nothing special, but he never let it bother him. He loved being aboard Unity's Pride. Even if he was the only human on the ship, he loved the excitement of space travel, the way the stars looked from the ship's observation deck, and the way the engines hummed under his fingertips when they were perfectly tuned. Despite the jokes and the sneers, Ethan knew that he was more than capable. He just didn't have the chance to prove it yet. One alien in particular, Zithar, the Kroga warrior, enjoyed making fun of him. Zithar was the type to boast about his strength and how his people could crush entire fleets without breaking a sweat. He would often tell Ethan, "You humans are nothing but weaklings. It's cute that you think you belong in the stars." Ethan would smile politely but say nothing in return. There was no point in arguing with someone who saw humans as inferior. But that didn't mean Ethan didn't want to show them all what he was capable of. He had a sharp mind and a curious nature. Where others saw technology, he saw puzzles to be solved. Where the other species worked to build, create, and conquer, Ethan worked to understand. He knew that humanity's real strength lay in their creativity and ability to adapt. While the aliens relied on brute force and ancient knowledge, humans could learn faster and think on their feet. One day, as the ship made its way to a distant star system to collect data on a new planet, the crew gathered in the main hall for a briefing. Zithar was standing by the door, bragging about his latest battle victories. "The Kroga Empire's might is unmatched. The galaxy will fall at our feet," he announced, his deep voice booming through the room. Ethan rolled his eyes but stayed quiet. He had heard it all before. Today, however, something was different. As the briefing started, Captain O'Connell, the human leader of the ship, gave them a new task. They would be heading toward a mysterious, long-forgotten starship that had been detected near a nebula. The ship was ancient and uncharted, and no one knew who had built it or why it had been abandoned. Zithar immediately scoffed. "What's the point of going to some dead old ship? There's nothing worth scavenging there. I'm sure even your pathetic human technology could never compare to our Kroga warships." Ethan felt the familiar sting of Zithar's words but didn't let it show. He was tired of hearing about how the Kroga were the galaxy's strongest species. He was ready for a change. When Captain O'Connell turned to him and asked, "Ethan, could you help with preparing the ship for the salvage mission?" Ethan nodded without hesitation. He had always loved working with forgotten technology, and this was the perfect opportunity to prove himself. "Of course, Captain. I'll get started right away," he replied. Zithar chuckled at the thought. A human scavenger. How fitting. But Ethan's mind was already racing with possibilities. What if this forgotten ship held something important? What if it was hiding a powerful secret? No one else seemed interested in the mission, and no one else thought it was worth their time. But Ethan, despite the mockery and the doubt, knew that this could be his moment. As the crew began to prepare for the mission, Ethan worked tirelessly, making sure the ship's equipment was in perfect condition for the journey. In his mind, he wasn't just preparing for a simple salvage operation. He was preparing for the chance to prove that humans had something more to offer the galaxy than anyone could have imagined. Zithar's mocking words echoed in his mind. But this time, they didn't bother him. He knew what he was capable of. And soon, the rest of the galaxy would know too. The Unity's Pride sailed through the vast emptiness of space, its crew preparing for the mission ahead. They had just entered the outskirts of a forgotten nebula, a dark and mysterious region of space that few ships dared to enter. The ship's sensors had picked up strange signals emanating from a large derelict vessel that seemed to float just outside the nebula's edge. It had been abandoned for centuries, its origins unknown. As the ship approached, the crew gathered on the observation deck. The nebula ahead shimmered in shades of purple and blue, and the abandoned vessel loomed large in the distance, casting a long shadow across the stars. The ancient ship was massive, built in a design that no one aboard Unity's Pride had ever seen before. It looked almost like a floating city, with wide, circular structures and long, narrow towers. There were no lights, no signs of life, just the cold, empty silence of space. Zithar stood near the front of the group, his arms crossed, his eyes narrowed as he looked at the ship. It looks like a relic. There's nothing valuable in there. Just scrap, he said dismissively, his voice full of scorn. Captain O'Connell, a seasoned and wise leader, remained calm as he surveyed the ship. We don't know that yet. We'll be careful. Let's just gather information and see what we're dealing with. Ethan, you're in charge of the salvage team. Ethan, standing slightly apart from the others, looked at the ship with a mixture of excitement and curiosity. He had always loved exploring the unknown, and this was a chance to learn something new. While the rest of the crew remained skeptical, Ethan's mind raced with possibilities. The ship was ancient, yes, but there could be something valuable hidden inside, something no one had ever discovered. Without waiting for any more instructions, Ethan made his way to the ship's docking bay, where the team would board the small shuttle that would take them to the abandoned vessel. Zithar followed, still muttering about how the mission was a waste of time. You'll see, he said gruffly. There's nothing here but dust and old metal. Ethan didn't respond. He didn't need to. He knew what he was capable of. While Zithar was content to mock, Ethan was already planning the steps he would take once they boarded the forgotten ship. He could almost feel the pull of discovery, the thrill of uncovering secrets long buried. The shuttle's engines hummed as they lifted off from Unity's Pride, cutting through the dark expanse of space. As the crew approached the derelict ship, Ethan's eyes widened in wonder. The closer they got, the more details he could make out. The ship was covered in strange markings and symbols, unlike anything he had ever seen. It almost seemed like the ship was calling to him, urging him to explore its mysteries. The shuttle landed with a soft thud on the ship's outer docking bay. The crew suited up, securing their helmets and checking their gear. Ethan was the first to exit, his heart pounding with excitement. The moment he stepped onto the ancient ship's surface, he felt a chill run through him. The air was stale, and the ship's interior was eerily silent. It was as if the entire vessel had been frozen in time. As they ventured deeper into the ship, the crew began to notice strange things. The walls were covered in intricate carvings, some of which glowed faintly with an otherworldly light. There were rooms filled with odd machines, their purposes unclear. Everything seemed to be designed for something, or someone, that wasn't human. Zithar scoffed again. This is just a tomb, Ethan. Nothing here can help us. We're wasting our time. Ethan ignored him and continued to explore, his curiosity growing stronger with each step. The deeper they went, the more he felt drawn to a particular area of the ship. It was located at the very heart of the vessel, in a chamber that seemed to pulse with energy. The door was sealed tightly, but Ethan's instincts told him this was where something important lay hidden. Using his tools, Ethan managed to open the door. Inside, he found a strange room filled with what looked like an enormous ancient weapon. It was unlike anything he had ever seen before, sleek and metallic, with a long barrel and intricate designs etched into its surface. The air around it seemed to hum with power. Ethan's hands trembled as he approached the weapon. He could feel its energy, its potential. It was as if the ship had been waiting for him to find it. He reached out slowly, touching the surface of the weapon, and the moment his fingers made contact, the entire room seemed to come alive. Lights flickered, and a low hum filled the air. "What is this?" Ethan whispered to himself. He could feel something within the weapon connecting to him, almost as if it were alive. Zithar and the others rushed into the room, startled by the sudden change in the atmosphere. They stared at the weapon in awe, but it was Ethan who stood there, almost as if he understood its power. "I think we just found something extraordinary," Ethan said quietly, a sense of wonder in his voice. Zithar looked at him, his expression softening for the first time. "Maybe you were right, human. Maybe there is something here after all." Ethan smiled, his heart racing. The adventure was just beginning. The room where Ethan stood felt alive, pulsing with energy. His hand remained on the strange weapon, which seemed to hum softly under his touch. The walls around him flickered with dim lights, and a low mechanical sound echoed through the chamber. The air was thick with mystery. Ethan could feel it. This was no ordinary weapon. It wasn't just something built for destruction. There was something more to it. Zithar, the Kroga warrior, stepped forward, his large form casting a shadow across the room. He eyed the weapon warily. "What is this?" he asked, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and suspicion. "It doesn't look like anything I've ever seen." Ethan didn't answer right away. He was too focused on the weapon, his fingers brushing the intricate carvings along its surface. They seemed to shift and change, almost like the weapon was communicating with him. He felt an odd sensation, as though the device was aware of his presence, responding to him in a way he couldn't explain. After a few moments, Ethan slowly pulled his hand away, almost unwilling to break the connection. The lights in the room flickered again, and the weapon seemed to power up. A faint, glowing line appeared along the barrel, like a pulse of energy. It was as if the weapon had come to life, ready to be wielded. "I don't know what it is," Ethan said finally, his voice steady but filled with wonder. "But I think it's more than just a weapon. I think it's some kind of ancient technology, and it might be the key to understanding this ship." Captain O'Connell, who had been observing from the doorway, stepped forward. "We need to be careful," she said. "This ship might hold secrets that could change everything. We don't know who built it or why it was abandoned." Ethan nodded, but his curiosity wouldn't let him turn away from the weapon. "I understand, Captain, but I need to know more. I need to figure out how it works." Zithar scoffed. "You think a human can figure out something this advanced? You're wasting your time." Ethan turned toward Zithar, his eyes narrowed. "You've had your say, Zithar, but I think I might be the one to solve this." The tension in the room grew thick. Zithar, who had always mocked Ethan's skills, looked at the human mechanic with an expression of doubt. But there was something else in his eyes now, something that could almost be called respect. He had seen how Ethan handled the ship's systems before, how he could fix things that no one else could. Maybe, just maybe, this human could figure out something no one else could. Ignoring the doubts of the others, Ethan carefully examined the weapon once more. He studied the glowing markings on its surface, the way they seemed to shift when he moved his hand. After a few minutes, he realized that there was a hidden panel near the base of the weapon. It was almost invisible, but when he pressed it, a small compartment slid open, revealing a series of buttons and switches. Ethan hesitated for only a moment before pressing one of the buttons. The room was instantly filled with a soft, high-pitched hum. The weapon's energy output seemed to increase, and for the briefest moment, Ethan felt a surge of power run through him. It wasn't painful, quite the opposite. It felt like the weapon had connected with him, as though it had chosen him as its wielder. The lights around the room brightened, and a holographic display appeared in the air, hovering just above the weapon. It was a series of symbols and diagrams, some familiar, some completely alien. Ethan's mind raced as he tried to make sense of it. This wasn't just a weapon. It was a a device that could manipulate energy, reshape matter, and even create protective fields. It was far more advanced than anything humans had ever created, but it seemed intuitive, as if it were designed to be understood by anyone who was willing to learn. Zithar took a cautious step forward. "What is that?" "Some kind of map?" he asked, his voice laced with both curiosity and skepticism. Ethan didn't answer immediately. He was too busy trying to piece together the information that was now being displayed in front of him. The symbols were like a puzzle, and with each new piece, it felt as though he was unlocking a deeper understanding of the weapon. He could feel its potential, its power. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a key to something much greater. "Captain," Ethan said, his voice filled with excitement, "this isn't just a weapon. It's a device that can change the very fabric of matter. It can manipulate energy in ways we've never imagined." Captain O'Connell raised an eyebrow. "Are you saying it could be used as a weapon?" Ethan hesitated, his mind racing. "Not just as a weapon. It could be used to repair systems, to create energy shields, to neutralize threats. It could even be used to build things. This is a tool that could revolutionize everything." The room fell silent as everyone processed what Ethan had just said. Zithar's skepticism seemed to fade slightly, and even Captain O'Connell's face softened. This wasn't just some ancient relic. It was something much more important. Something that could change the future of their entire species. Ethan's heart raced. He knew he had just discovered something incredible. But what he didn't know was that this was only the beginning. There were more secrets hidden within this ship, secrets that, if uncovered, could either help humanity rise to greatness or destroy everything they had worked for. Ethan stood frozen, staring at the holographic display floating in the air. The weapon in his hands thrummed with power, almost as though it were alive. The alien symbols and diagrams were no longer a mystery, at least not completely. He understood the basics now. The weapon was far more than a simple tool for combat. It was a device capable of manipulating energy, shaping matter, and even altering the structure of the ship itself. The potential was endless. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing thoughts. The others in the room, Captain O'Connell, Zithar, and the rest of the crew, watched him, their expressions a mixture of awe and curiosity. Zithar, who had once mocked Ethan, stood quietly, a rare expression of uncertainty on his face. "What are you going to do with it?" Captain O'Connell asked, her voice calm but filled with concern. She had always trusted Ethan, but this was something beyond what they had ever encountered. Ethan glanced at the weapon in his hands. He could feel the power surging through it, like an untamed force waiting to be controlled. It was clear now that this was more than just a relic. It was a piece of lost technology, technology that could change everything. "I need to understand it more," Ethan said, his voice steady but filled with determination. "This weapon is designed to be used by someone who can think creatively, someone who can adapt. It's not just for fighting. It can build, repair, protect. But we need to figure out exactly how it works." Zithar stepped forward, his large frame casting a shadow over Ethan. "You think you can control this? It's beyond human understanding." Ethan didn't look at him. Instead, he focused on the weapon. He knew Zithar would doubt him. He always did. But Ethan had something the Kroga didn't, curiosity and the ability to think outside the box. He had always been able to find solutions to problems that others overlooked. "Humanity's strength is in its ability to adapt," Ethan replied, his voice firm. "We don't need to be the strongest, but we can learn, and I believe I can learn how to use this." Captain O'Connell nodded, but there was a look of caution in her eyes. "Be careful, Ethan. We don't know what else this ship might hold. We can't risk triggering something we don't understand." Ethan understood her concern. The ship was ancient, and there was no telling what kind of dangers it might hold. But the weapon in his hands felt different. It wasn't just an object. It was an opportunity. If used correctly, it could protect them, help them, and maybe even change the balance of power in the galaxy. The question was, Could he figure it out before something went wrong? He turned back to the weapon, tapping a few of the glowing buttons on its surface. At first, nothing happened. But then, the energy inside the weapon shifted. The glow intensified, and the air around Ethan seemed to hum. A sudden rush of information flooded his mind. Symbols, equations, and instructions on how to operate the weapon's various functions. It was overwhelming, but Ethan focused, blocking out everything except the flow of knowledge that seemed to be coming from the device. For a moment, it felt like time had slowed down. Ethan's mind raced as he processed the information. He could see how the weapon could create force fields, manipulate energy, and even repair damaged systems. It wasn't just about attacking. It was about reshaping the world around them, making the impossible possible. "What's happening?" Zithar asked, his voice filled with curiosity and concern. "I'm learning," Ethan replied, his eyes fixed on the weapon. "I'm understanding how it works. It's not just a tool, it's a system. And if I can figure out the right way to control it, it could do more than we ever imagined." Zithar narrowed his eyes, still unsure. "You still think you can control it? You're not even trained in weaponry. This is dangerous." Ethan met his gaze, his face serious. "I don't need to be trained in traditional weaponry. This isn't just about strength or skill. This is about understanding. The weapon responds to thought and intent, and I'm learning how to guide it." Captain O'Connell stepped forward, her expression thoughtful. "If you can truly understand it, then it could be a valuable asset. But we must be careful. The galaxy is full of dangers, and not all of them can be solved with power." Ethan nodded. He knew the captain was right. Power alone wouldn't solve everything. But with the right knowledge and strategy, this weapon could level the playing field. It could give humanity the chance to stand alongside the more advanced races in the galaxy, not through brute force, but through intelligence and innovation. As he continued to study the weapon, Ethan's mind raced with possibilities. It was clear now that the ancient ship held far more than just a powerful weapon. It held the key to a new future. The knowledge locked within the weapon could help humanity rise to greatness. But with that power came responsibility. Ethan's thoughts were interrupted when the holographic display blinked and a new set of symbols appeared. They were different from the ones he had seen before, more complex, more mysterious. He knew there was more to learn, more to understand, and he was ready for it. The others watched in silence as Ethan continued to explore the weapon's secrets. He could feel the weight of their eyes on him, but he didn't let it distract him. This was his moment. He had found something that could change the course of history, and he wasn't going to let it slip away. Ethan stood at the center of the room, still holding the weapon, feeling its power flow through him. His mind was racing, processing everything he had learned so far. The weapon was more than just a tool. It was a key to something greater. He could feel it, deep in his bones. But as the lights in the room flickered and the strange symbols continued to glow on the weapon's surface, a new thought crossed his mind. They weren't the only ones who might want this technology. The ship hummed with a strange energy, as if it were alive, waiting for something. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. The weapon felt like it was part of a larger puzzle. He couldn't help but wonder, what other secrets did this ancient vessel hide? Captain O'Connell was still standing by the door, watching him carefully. "Ethan," she said, her voice steady but filled with concern, "what have you learned so far? Do you think you understand how to control this thing?" Ethan's eyes didn't leave the weapon. "I'm getting there," he said, his voice low but confident. "It's not just a weapon, Captain. It's a tool, something that can do more than fight. It can create, heal, even protect. But it's going to take time. It's like learning a new language." Zithar, who had been quiet until now, stepped closer, eyeing the weapon with skepticism. "You're still not sure, are you? This ship, this weapon, we don't even know where it came from or who built it. It could be dangerous." "I know," Ethan replied, his eyes still focused on the weapon. "But there's something about it. I can feel it. It's meant for more than just destruction. It's a gift, a powerful tool we could use." Before Captain O'Connell could respond, a sudden, harsh sound cut through the air. It was the loud screech of an alarm, followed by the flashing red lights that filled the room. The peaceful atmosphere turned to chaos in an instant. The crew looked around, alarmed. Something was wrong. The calm that had surrounded the ship was gone, replaced by a sense of danger. "Captain," shouted one of the crew members, pointing toward the monitoring system. "We've detected incoming ships. They're coming fast." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He could feel the shift in the air, a sense of urgency hanging over them. "Who are they?" he asked, his voice tense. "Unknown," the crew member replied quickly. "They don't match any known fleet signatures, but they're definitely hostile." Captain O'Connell's expression hardened. "Prepare for battle, everyone. Ethan, get that weapon ready. We need to defend ourselves." Ethan turned to the weapon in his hands. The thought of using it for combat hadn't crossed his mind yet, but now there was no choice. He had to learn fast, or they might all be doomed. As the crew scrambled to their stations, Ethan turned back to the weapon. He focused on it, his mind trying to recall the glowing symbols and what he had learned so far. He tapped a few buttons, but nothing happened at first. Sweat trickled down his forehead. Was he missing something? Then, just as panic began to rise, the weapon's energy surged, and the air in the room seemed to vibrate with power. The weapon's barrel glowed brighter, and Ethan could feel the heat of its energy. He had unlocked something that could defend them. The weapon was no longer just a mystery. It was part of him now. "Captain, I think it's ready," Ethan said, his voice filled with a newfound confidence. "This weapon, it can create barriers, shields. It can repel their attacks." Captain O'Connell nodded, her eyes narrowing with determination. "Good. But we don't know how strong these attackers are. We have to be careful." Outside, the sound of approaching ships grew louder. Ethan could feel the tension building as the crew prepared for the incoming assault. The ship's hull vibrated as the enemy fleet drew closer, their weapons ready to strike. The ancient vessel, long forgotten by time, was about to face its first battle in centuries. "Everyone, to your stations," Captain O'Connell barked. "Zithar, get the weapons ready. Ethan, activate the shield." Ethan's hands moved quickly over the weapon, following the symbols and commands he had learned. The weapon seemed to respond instantly, its energy swirling around it. He could feel the power at his fingertips, and with a sharp motion, he directed the weapon's energy into a protective shield around the ship. Outside, the enemy ships opened fire. Bright bolts of energy slammed into the shield, but to Ethan's amazement, the weapon's barrier held strong. The strikes were absorbed by the shield, dissipating harmlessly into the air. The ship shook slightly from the force, but it didn't break. Zithar let out a low growl of surprise. "Impressive, human," he muttered, though there was no mockery in his voice this time. "I didn't think you could do it." Ethan's focus never wavered. He adjusted the settings, strengthening the shield just as another round of energy bolts came crashing toward them. The weapon hummed with power, its surface glowing brighter as it formed an impenetrable barrier. "Keep them off us," Captain O'Connell commanded, her voice fierce. "We need to find out who they are and why they're here." Ethan nodded, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He had just unlocked a powerful weapon, but he knew it wasn't enough. They were up against an unknown enemy, and time was running out. The future of the Unity's Pride and its crew rested in his hands. The shield around the Unity's Pride held firm as the enemy ships continued to fire, their energy bolts crackling against the protective barrier. Ethan's heart raced, but he didn't let the pressure get to him. His hands moved quickly over the weapon, adjusting the shield's strength and adding small pulses of energy to push back the incoming fire. The weapon was responding well, stronger than he had ever imagined. But just as he thought they might have a chance to defend themselves, the ship's alarm sounded again, this time more urgently. "Captain, they're changing tactics. One of the crew members shouted from the control panel. "They're launching smaller craft, boarding vessels. They're coming straight for us." Captain O'Connell's expression turned grim. "We can't hold them off forever. We need to prepare for boarders. Zithar, get to the armory and equip the crew. Ethan, stay with that weapon. We'll need you to power up the shields and any other defense systems we can use." Ethan nodded, but his mind was still spinning. He hadn't expected this. The enemy wasn't just here to destroy the ship. They were here to board it. And once they were inside, things would get much more dangerous. He couldn't let that happen. The sound of the boarding vessels growing closer made the air tense, and Ethan quickly activated a few more defense systems. His hands flew over the controls, his thoughts racing. He could feel the weapon's power flowing through him, but it wasn't enough. "Not yet. I'm opening the secondary defense grid," he muttered under his breath, tapping another series of buttons on the weapon. The ship's interior lights flickered as a new layer of energy spread through the walls, reinforcing the shields. It was like an invisible wall surrounding the entire ship, designed to repel anything that came close. Captain O'Connell turned toward Ethan as the ship's security grid powered up. "How long will this hold them off?" Ethan didn't look up from his work. "I'm not sure. The weapon can only hold so much energy, but I think it will give us time to prepare." Zithar returned from the armory, fully equipped and ready for battle. His large form was a comforting presence as he stood by the door, keeping watch. "We will not let them take the ship," he said with a grim nod. Ethan's eyes flicked to the control panel, watching as the small enemy craft docked with the Unity's Pride. He felt a surge of tension, his mind racing through every possible plan. The shield was holding, but only for a little while longer. The enemy ships were unlike anything they had ever seen. Their sleek, dark forms were designed for speed and stealth, their weapons powerful but precise. Ethan could see on the radar that they were organized. This wasn't just a random attack. This was a calculated assault. As the boarding craft latched onto the ship, the metal doors groaned under the pressure of the docking. Ethan could hear the distinct sound of the enemy forces breaking through. The crew braced themselves, their weapons ready, but no one could predict what was coming next. "They're inside," one of the crew shouted. "They've breached the hull." Ethan's heart sank. The shield had done its job, but it wouldn't stop the enemy from getting in. The air was thick with tension as the crew members quickly took their positions, waiting for the first sign of the intruders. Ethan's hand hovered over the weapon, trying to think of a way to use it against the invaders. He had no idea who these enemies were, but it was clear that they had come for the ship, and they would stop at nothing to take it. Captain O'Connell looked at him. "Ethan, if you have any more tricks up your sleeve, now's the time to use them." Ethan nodded, his mind working quickly. He could feel the weapon in his hands, humming with energy, ready to be used. But there was more to this device than just creating shields and barriers. He remembered the diagrams he had seen earlier, the ones that showed energy manipulation, force fields, and even something that could affect the ship's systems. "Get ready," Ethan said, taking a deep breath. He turned the weapon's settings to a different configuration, this time focusing on the ship's internal systems. The weapon began to glow brighter as Ethan poured energy into the walls, causing the ship's interior to hum with power. A sudden surge of energy flowed through the entire ship, locking doors, securing hatches, and setting off security systems that hadn't been activated in ages. Zithar grinned, his teeth flashing in the dim light. "Now we have them." The crew gathered together, their weapons in hand, ready for whatever the enemy had planned. Ethan could feel the pressure mounting, but he remained calm. The weapon was more than just a defense. It was a tool that could control the very systems of the ship. If he could keep the energy flowing, they would have the advantage. The first enemy soldier appeared in the corridor outside the control room. He was tall and clad in dark armor, his face hidden behind a helmet. He raised his weapon, ready to attack. But before he could fire, the walls around him suddenly shifted, blocking his path. The ship's security systems had been activated, and the intruder was trapped. Ethan's voice rang out over the comms. "This is our ship. You're not taking it." With that, the crew launched into action. Zithar led the charge, his massive frame barreling forward with surprising speed. Ethan stayed by the control panel, his fingers flying over the weapon's interface. Each move was precise, calculated. The ship was his ally now, and together, they would fight to protect it. The corridors of the Unity's Pride were filled with the echoes of footsteps and the sharp sounds of weapons charging. The enemy had already infiltrated the ship, and the crew had no choice but to fight for their lives. Zithar and the others had quickly taken control of the most vital sections of the ship, but they couldn't relax just yet. The enemy was relentless, and they had numbers on their side. The crew was outnumbered, but they weren't going down without a fight. Ethan stood at the control panel, watching the live feeds from all over the ship. His hands gripped the weapon tightly, ready to use its power in any way necessary. He could feel the ship responding to him, as if it were an extension of himself. The energy was still flowing, and he had to keep it that way. The enemy hadn't stopped their assault, and neither could he. Outside, the fighting was fierce. The enemy had breached the security systems, but Ethan's control over the ship's systems had given them an advantage. He had locked doors, sealed corridors, and activated traps that slowed the invaders down. But now they were pushing forward, closer and closer to the control room. "They're getting closer," Captain O'Connell said, her voice calm but filled with urgency. She stood beside Ethan, her eyes scanning the data on the screen. "We need to hold them off just a little longer. Are you sure the weapon can do what we need it to do?" Ethan didn't look away from the control panel. "It's more than just a weapon. It's a tool. I can control the energy, redirect it to the systems we need. If we can push them back just a little longer, I'll have more time to figure out the final steps." Zithar's voice crackled over the comms. "The enemy is pushing through Sector 3. We need reinforcements." "Hold your ground," Captain O'Connell replied firmly. "Ethan, we need to prepare for the worst. If the weapon can't stop them, we may have to take the final step." Ethan nodded, but the thought of using the weapon in such a drastic way lingered in his mind. The weapon had immense power, far more than he had originally realized. But would it be enough to drive the enemy away without causing irreversible damage? Before he could respond, the ship shook violently, throwing him off balance. The lights flickered, and the sound of metal groaning echoed throughout the hallways. The enemy was getting closer. They had managed to disable the ship's outer defenses, and the breach was widening. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He focused again on the weapon, trying to push the thoughts of doubt out of his mind. There was no time for hesitation. He could feel the power coursing through him, ready to be used. The weapon was designed for a purpose, and he knew that purpose now. Captain O'Connell looked at him, her eyes filled with determination. "Ethan, now is the time. Use the weapon to drive them out." Ethan took a deep breath. The weapon thrummed with energy, its glow pulsing brighter with each passing second. He reached out, tapping the final sequence of symbols on the weapon's surface. The energy surged, and the air around him seemed to vibrate. For a moment, everything was still. Then, the ship's systems responded, amplifying the energy that Ethan had channeled. The walls of the ship seemed to come alive, and a powerful shockwave erupted from the control room, shaking the entire vessel. It was as though the ship itself had awakened, unleashing its full force. The enemy outside faltered, their advance momentarily stopped by the sheer power of the blast. The shockwave rippled through the ship, sweeping away anything in its path. Ethan could feel the energy pulling at him, but he held on, guiding it where it needed to go. "We've got them." Zithar's voice echoed through the comms. "The enemy is retreating." Ethan exhaled in relief, but he wasn't finished yet. He quickly redirected the remaining energy to reinforce the ship's internal defenses. The enemy was retreating, but they wouldn't stop until they had everything. The crew couldn't afford to relax just yet. The doors to the control room hissed open, and Sithar entered, his armor dented but his expression victorious. "The ship is safe. For now." Ethan nodded but kept his focus on the weapon. The power it held was unlike anything they had ever encountered. He wasn't sure what it could do in the future, but he knew one thing for sure. The ancient technology had saved them. It had protected their home, their crew, and their future. "We did it," Captain O'Connell said quietly. She looked at Ethan with a mixture of pride and gratitude. "You did it, Ethan. We couldn't have held them off without you." Ethan finally allowed himself to relax, but only for a moment. There was still much to learn, and he knew the galaxy was full of more dangers. The weapon might have given them a chance to survive this time, but their fight wasn't over. The galaxy was vast, and they were only beginning to understand the power they now held. But for now, they had won. They had faced an impossible enemy, and through ingenuity, determination, and the power of the ancient weapon, they had come out victorious. Ethan stood tall, holding the weapon tightly in his hands. The battle was over, but the journey had just begun.